What if a stranger's smallest act could change the course of your entire life? Without either of you knowing it, Caleb Foster's boots scuffed against the stone courtyard of Hawthorne Preparatory, the broom in his hands moving in steady, practice strokes. At 38, his broad shoulders still carried the strength of his youth, but his hazel eyes, flecked with worry, betrayed years of scraping by. His Navy janitor's uniform, patched at the knees and frayed at the cuffs, hung loosely on his lean frame. The job at Hawthorne was a lifeline, barely enough to cover rent for the cramped one-bedroom apartment he shared with his 8-year-old daughter, Sadie, and the inhalers that kept her asthma at bay. Every paycheck was a tightrope walk, every day a battle to keep them afloat. Sadie was his everything. Her curly brown hair and bright eyes mirrored her mother, Ellie, whose laugh still haunted Caleb's dreams. 3 years ago, a drunk driver had taken Ellie, leaving Caleb to navigate fatherhood alone. Sadie's asthma attacks were a constant reminder of how fragile their life was. Each wheeze a knife in his chest, each hospital visit a dent in their savings. He worked late shifts, scrubbed floors, and cleaned up after the elite students of Hawthorne to keep her safe, to keep her breathing. The weight of it all pressed on him, but he bore it quietly. For her, Hawthorne Preparatory was a world apart, a fortress of privilege where children of America's wealthiest families studied behind ivy-covered walls. The students in their tailored blazers drove cars worth more than Caleb's life savings. The faculty treated him like part of the scenery, invisible unless a spill needed mopping or a toilet needed unclogging. He'd learned to keep his head down, to avoid trouble. The headmaster, Dr. Margaret Ellison, had made it clear, janitors were to be seen, not heard. Caleb didn't mind. He didn't need their respect. He needed the job. But on this golden autumn afternoon, as leaves skittered across the courtyard, a sound broke the rhythm of his broom. A soft, choking sob, barely audible over the rustle of the breeze. Caleb paused, his hands tightening on the broom handle. He scanned the courtyard, his eyes landing on a small figure hunched on the stone steps leading to the library. A girl no older than Sadie, her navy blazer crumpled, her blonde hair falling in messy strands over her face. Her shoulders shook with silent cries. Teachers passed by, their footsteps brisk, their voices low. Clara Alden again, one murmured, shaking her head. She'll get over it. Caleb's jaw clenched. He knew those tears, the kind that came from a place too deep for words. Sadie had cried like that after Ellie's funeral, curled up in his lap, her small body trembling. He glanced around. The courtyard was empty now, the teachers gone. His battered janitor's cart creaked as he reached into the side pocket, pulling out a small plastic bottle of bubbles he kept for Sadie. It was a dollar store trinket, something to coax a smile from her on bad days. He hesitated, his thumb brushing the cap. The rules were strict. No interaction with students. Breaking them could cost him everything: rent, inhalers, Sadie's safety. But the girl's sobs grew quieter, more desperate, like she was trying to disappear. Caleb knew that kind of hiding. He'd done it himself, night after night, when the grief for Ellie threatened to swallow him whole. Caleb crouched a few feet from the girl, keeping his distance to avoid startling her. He twisted the cap off the bottle, dipped the wand, and blew gently. A stream of bubbles floated into the air, catching the sunlight in iridescent swirls. They drifted toward the girl, popping softly against the stone steps. She didn't look up at first, her face buried in her knees. Caleb blew again, sending another cascade of bubbles her way. One landed on her sleeve, bursting with a faint pop. She froze, then slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were red, her cheeks streaked with tears, but they followed the bubbles as they floated upward, shimmering against the autumn sky. Caleb kept his movement slow, deliberate, blowing another stream. A tiny smile flickered on her lips, hesitant at first, then growing as she reached out to pop a bubble with her finger. A giggle escaped her, soft and surprised, like she hadn't expected to feel anything but sadness. "You okay?" Caleb asked, his voice low, gentle, the way he spoke to Sadie during her asthma attacks. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I like bubbles," she said, her voice small but clear. "My mom used to do that." Caleb's heart twisted. He didn't ask about her mom, didn't need to. The weight in her words was enough. My daughter likes 'em too, he said instead, blowing another stream. Sadie. She's 8. Loves chasing these things around the park. Says they're like tiny rainbows. The girl, Clara, he remembered the teacher saying, watched the bubbles with a kind of wonder, her shoulders relaxing. I'm Clara, she said almost shyly. Clara Alden. Caleb nodded, keeping his face neutral. Alden. The name on the school's main building. Richard Alden's daughter. The billionaire who'd founded Hawthorne, whose name carried weight in every corner of the school. Caleb didn't let it show, but he felt the gravity of it. He wasn't supposed to be here, talking to her. But Clara's smile, fragile as it was, felt like a victory, a small rebellion against the rules that kept him invisible. High above, in the corner office of the administration building, Richard Alden stood at his floor-to-ceiling window, his sharp blue eyes fixed on the courtyard. His tailored suit was immaculate, his posture rigid, but his hands were clenched behind his back, knuckles white. He'd been watching Clara for 20 minutes, his chest tight as she cried alone. He'd seen the teachers pass by, their indifference a quiet betrayal. He'd been about to go down himself when the janitor appeared. Richard didn't know the man's name, but he recognized the worn boots, the battered cart. He'd seen him before, always in the background, cleaning up after the school's elite. Now, that same man was crouching beside his daughter, blowing bubbles like it was the most natural thing in the world. Clara's smile, her first real smile since her mother, Laura, died 7 months ago, hit Richard like a tidal wave. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched, his throat tight, his mind racing. Laura had loved bubbles, too, filling their backyard with them on lazy summer evenings. The memory stung, sharp and raw, but Clara's giggle softened the edges. The next morning, Caleb was scrubbing the locker room floors, the sharp scent of bleach stinging his nose, when the headmaster's assistant, a nervous young woman named Emily, summoned him to the administration building. His stomach dropped. Someone must have seen him with Clara. He wiped his hands on his coveralls, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Would they fire him? Dock his pay? He couldn't afford either, not with Sadie's next doctor's appointment looming, not with the landlord's latest warning about late rent. The administration office was a world away from the janitor's closet, mahogany furniture, crystal chandeliers, the kind of wealth that made Caleb feel like an intruder. Richard Alden sat behind a massive desk, his presence commanding despite his casual posture. He was in his late 40s, with salt and pepper hair and a face that could have been carved from stone, but his eyes held something softer, something searching, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. You're Caleb Foster, Richard said, not a question. His voice was smooth, measured, like he was used to being listened to. You were with my daughter yesterday. Caleb's throat tightened. I didn't mean any trouble, sir. She was upset. You broke protocol, Richard cut in, but there was no anger in his tone. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing. You also made her smile. She hasn't done that since her mother passed. Caleb blinked, caught off guard. He hadn't expected this. I'm sorry for your loss, he said quietly, meaning it. Richard waved a hand, dismissing the condolence, but his eyes lingered on Caleb. Clara's been struggling. The school counselor says she's withdrawn, barely speaks in sessions. But you got through to her in 10 minutes with a bottle of bubbles. How? Caleb shifted, uncomfortable under the scrutiny. I've got a daughter, Sadie. She's 8. Sometimes, when things get heavy, a little distraction helps. Bubbles are simple. Kids like simple. They don't judge you for it. Richard nodded slowly, like he was piecing something together. You're raising her alone? Yeah. Caleb's voice was steady, but the weight of it was there. Her mom's gone too. Car accident 3 years ago. It's just me and Sadie now. For a moment, neither man spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was shared. A quiet acknowledgement of losses too big for words. Richard stood, crossing to the window, his back to Caleb. I want you to keep an eye on Clara, he said finally. Not as a janitor. As someone she can trust. I'll pay you extra. Off the books. Caleb frowned, his instincts bristling. I'm not a babysitter, Mr. Alden. I clean floors. That's my job. You're a father, Richard said, turning to face him. That's what she needs. I can't. He paused, his voice catching. I can't reach her. Not the way she needs. Caleb wanted to argue, but the look in Richard's eyes, raw, almost pleading, stopped him. He thought of Sadie, of the nights he'd held her through asthma attacks, of the way she clung to him when the world felt too big. He nodded just once. Okay, but I'm not doing it for the money. Richard's lips twitched, not quite a smile. I know. Over the next few weeks, Caleb found himself woven into Clara's world. He didn't stop being a janitor. His days were still filled with mopping hallways, scrubbing toilets, and polishing brass railings. But at the end of his shifts, he'd find Clara waiting in the courtyard, her backpack slung over one shoulder. He'd blow bubbles, tell her stories about Sadie's adventures at the park, or listen as she talked about her mom, Laura. She spoke of Laura's garden, filled with roses and lavender, of the way she'd braid Clara's hair into intricate patterns, of the lullabies she'd sing in a voice like warm honey. Caleb didn't push, just listened, letting her grief spill out in its own time. Her tears came less often, replaced by shy smiles and quiet laughter. Clara started opening up about other things, too. Her fear of disappointing her father, the pressure of being an Alden in a school that bore her family's name. Everyone expects me to be perfect, she said one day, popping a bubble with her finger. But I'm not. Nobody's perfect, Caleb replied, blowing another stream. Not even your dad. Not even me. Sadie says I burn toast like it's my job. Clara giggled, and Caleb felt a quiet pride. He wasn't fixing her grief. No one could. But he was giving her moments of lightness, the way he did for Sadie. Sadie, meanwhile, was thriving. Her asthma was under control, thanks to a new prescription, and she'd started asking about the bubble girl her dad spent time with. One Saturday, Caleb brought Sadie to the school, and the two girls clicked instantly. They chased bubbles across the courtyard, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. Clara taught Sadie how to make a daisy chain, her small fingers patient as she guided Sadie's hands. Sadie showed Clara how to skip stones on the school's ornamental pond, cheering when Clara's stone bounced twice. Watching them, Caleb felt a warmth he hadn't known since Ellie. It wasn't just about Clara anymore, it was about Sadie, too, finding a friend in a world that often felt too hard. Richard noticed the change in Clara. He started seeking Caleb out, not just to talk about his daughter, but to talk about life. They'd sit in the courtyard after hours, sharing coffee from Caleb's thermos, their conversations drifting from grief to fatherhood to the weight of expectations. Richard was a man used to control, his empire built on calculated moves and unyielding ambition, but he was unraveling, haunted by Laura's death and his own absence in Clara's life. He admitted he'd been a distant father, consumed by board meetings and acquisitions, leaving Clara to grieve alone. Caleb, with his quiet strength and unpolished honesty, became an unlikely confidant. He didn't judge Richard for his wealth or his mistakes, and Richard didn't look down on Caleb for his worn boots or modest life. They were just two fathers, bound by loss and love for their daughters. But not everyone approved. Dr. Ellison, the headmaster, watched Caleb's growing connection with the Alden family with a scowl. She was a woman of rigid rules, her authority unchallenged at Hawthorne. To her, Caleb was overstepping, a janitor daring to mingle with the elite. Whispers spread among the faculty, favoritism, unprofessionalism. Some teachers stopped acknowledging Caleb altogether, their gazes sliding past him in the halls. Others made pointed comments about knowing one's place. Caleb felt the stares, the cold shoulders, but he ignored them, focusing on Clara and Sadie. Still, the tension was building, a storm waiting to break. One crisp November evening, as Caleb was locking up the maintenance shed, Dr. Ellison cornered him. Her heels clicked sharply on the stone path, her face a mask of controlled anger. "You're out of your depth, Foster," she said, her voice icy. "You think you're special because Alden's taken a liking to you? You're a janitor. Stay in your lane." Caleb kept his face neutral, but her words cut deep. He'd heard them before, not from Ellison, but from life. From the landlord who sneered when he asked for an extension, from the doctor who'd sighed when he couldn't pay up front. He was about to respond when a scream tore through the air, Clara's scream. His heart lurched, and he sprinted toward the sound, Ellison's words forgotten. He found Clara in the courtyard, crumpled on the steps, clutching her chest, her breaths coming in short, panic gasps. An asthma attack. Just like Sadie's. Caleb dropped to his knees, his hand steady despite the adrenaline flooding his veins. He grabbed Sadie's spare inhaler from his cart, always kept close for emergencies. "Clara, look at me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Breathe with me. In, out." He held the inhaler to her lips, guiding her through a puff. Her eyes, wide with fear, locked onto his, and he kept talking, low and steady, telling her about the time Sadie tried to rescue a frog from the park pond and ended up soaked. Clara's breathing slowed, her panic easing, a faint smile tugging at her lips. By the time Richard arrived, summoned by a frantic teacher, Clara was leaning against Caleb, exhausted but safe. Richard's face was pale, his hands shaking as he knelt beside his daughter. "How did you know what to do?" he asked, his voice raw. "My daughter," Caleb said simply. "She's got asthma too. I've been through this more times than I can count." Richard pulled Clara into his arms, his eyes meeting Caleb's over her shoulder. "Thank you," he whispered, the words heavy with gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do if—" He didn't finish, but Caleb understood. He'd felt that fear, that helplessness, every time Sadie's lungs betrayed her. But the incident wasn't over. The next morning, Dr. Ellison called Caleb into her office. Her desk was cluttered with files, but her expression was cold, unyielding. "You administered medication to a student," she said. Her tone clipped. "That's a violation. You're suspended, pending investigation." Caleb's world tilted. Suspension meant no pay. No pay meant no rent, no inhalers for Sadie, no groceries. He tried to explain about Clara's attack, about the inhaler, but Ellison cut him off. "You're not a doctor. You're not even a teacher. You're done here." Caleb walked out of her office, his chest tight, his mind racing. He didn't tell Sadie, didn't want her to worry. That night, he sat at their small kitchen table, staring at a stack of bills, rent, medical, utilities. His hands trembled as he calculated what he could sell, what he could cut. The pawn shop might take Ellie's old guitar, but the thought of parting with it made his stomach churn. He'd been here before, rock bottom, but this felt different. This wasn't just about him. It was about Sadie, Clara, the fragile trust he'd built. He didn't sleep. Word of Caleb's suspension spread through Hawthorne like wildfire. The faculty whispered, the students gossiped, but Clara was devastated. She refused to go to class, locking herself in her room at home, her sobs audible through the door. Richard, furious, confronted Ellison, but she held firm, citing protocol and liability. "He's a liability," she said, her voice sharp. "You of all people should understand that, Mr. Alden." Richard didn't understand. He saw a man who'd saved his daughter's life, who'd given her something no amount of money could buy: care. He dug into Caleb's personnel file, learning about his years of quiet dedication, his spotless record. He learned about Sadie, about the accident that took Ellie, about the man who'd kept going despite it all. Richard's anger grew, not just at Ellison, but at the system that treated men like Caleb as disposable. Then came the twist. Richard's assistant Lena, a sharp young woman with a knack for digging, uncovered an email chain between Ellison and a board member, buried in a server backup. The emails revealed a plan to replace Caleb with Ellison's nephew, a recent college graduate with no experience but a powerful family name. The suspension wasn't about protocol, it was personal. Ellison had been looking for an excuse to push Caleb out, and Clara's asthma attack had given her the perfect opening. Richard didn't hesitate. He called an emergency board meeting, presenting the emails to the stunned trustees. Ellison's face drained of color as the evidence was laid bare. She tried to deflect, citing her years of service, her dedication to Hawthorne's reputation, but the board was unforgiving. She was forced to resign, her nephew's application quietly buried. Caleb was reinstated, with a raise and a formal apology from the board. But Richard went further. He offered Caleb a new role, facilities manager, with a salary that would cover Sadie's treatments, rent, and more. It wasn't charity, Richard insisted, it was earned. Caleb hesitated, his pride warring with his need. He wasn't a man who liked handouts, but this wasn't about him. It was about Sadie, about giving her a life, where she didn't have to worry about the next hospital bill. It was about Clara, about being there for her the way he wished someone had been there for him after Ellie. He accepted, shaking Richard's hand, their eyes meeting in a moment of mutual respect. But as he walked away, a new fear settled in his chest. Change was hard, and trust was fragile. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the storm. The weeks that followed were a blur of change. Caleb's new role as facilities manager gave him a clipboard instead of a broom, a walkie-talkie instead of a mop. He oversaw the maintenance staff, his quiet competence earning their respect. The faculty's whispers faded, replaced by grudging acknowledgement. Some even offered hesitant smiles in the halls, a small victory Caleb didn't take for granted. Clara returned to school, her smile brighter, her steps lighter. She and Sadie became inseparable, their friendship a bridge between their father's worlds. Caleb and Richard's conversations grew longer, their coffee meetings a ritual. They talked about their daughters, their losses, their fears. Richard admitted he'd been absent too long, consumed by his empire, leaving Clara to grieve alone. "I built this school for her," he said one evening, his voice low. "But I forgot how to be her father." Caleb nodded, staring into his coffee. "I get it. After Ellie, I thought I'd lose Sadie too, not to asthma, but to my own failures. Every day, I'm scared I'm not enough." "You're enough," Richard said, his voice firm. "You're more than enough." The words hit Caleb hard, stirring something he hadn't felt in years. Pride, not just in his work, but in himself. He thought of Ellie, of the way she believed in him, even when he doubted himself. He'd been trying to live up to her memory, to be the father Sadie deserved. Now, watching Sadie and Clara chase bubbles in the courtyard, their laughter a melody against the autumn dusk, he felt like he was getting there. But the real turning point came one winter evening, when Richard invited Caleb and Sadie to his home, a sprawling estate that felt more like a museum than a house. Clara had insisted on a bubble party, and the girls were in the backyard, blowing bubbles under string lights, their laughter filling the night. Caleb and Richard stood on the patio, watching them, the cold air sharp against their faces. The estate's gardens stretched out before them, Laura's roses dormant under a thin layer of frost. "You changed your life," Richard said, his voice thick. "Mine too." Caleb shook his head, his eyes on Sadie. "Just did what felt right. You'd have done the same." Richard turned to him, his expression raw. "I don't know if I would have. Not before this. You showed me what matters. Not the money, not the name. Just this." He gestured to the girls, their bubbles catching the light like tiny stars. Caleb's throat tightened. He thought of the nights he'd sat alone, Ellie's absence a physical ache, wondering if he'd ever find his way. He thought of Sadie's first asthma attack, the terror of not knowing if she'd make it. He thought of Clara, alone on those steps, and the way a bottle of bubbles had brought her back. "We're all just trying," he said finally. "For them." Richard nodded, his eyes glistening. For the first time, Caleb saw him not as a billionaire, but as a father broken and mending just like him. Spring came to Hawthorne, the courtyard blooming with color, the air warm with promise. Caleb stood by the library steps, his new uniform crisp but practical, a clipboard tucked under his arm. Sadie and Clara were across the lawn, teaching a group of younger students how to blow bubbles, their laughter carrying on the breeze. The school felt different now, not just a place of work, but a community, one Caleb had helped shape. The maintenance staff looked to him for guidance, their respect earned through his quiet leadership. The faculty, once distant, now nodded in acknowledgement, some even stopping to chat about their own kids, their own lives. Richard joined Caleb, a rare smile softening his features. They didn't speak at first, just watched the girls, the moment heavy with unspoken gratitude. Caleb thought of the past year, the broom, the bubbles, the suspension, the second chance. He thought of Ellie, of the way she believed in small acts of kindness, of the way she'd loved Sadie with every breath. He'd carried her loss like a stone in his chest, but now, standing here, he felt lighter. Not because the pain was gone, but because he'd found a way to carry it, with Sadie's smile, with Clara's trust, with Richard's friendship. Richard broke the silence. "I'm funding a new asthma clinic in town," he said, his voice casual but deliberate. For kids like Clara and Sadie. I want you to help run it, not the medical side, but the heart of it. Making sure it's a place where kids feel safe, where parents don't feel alone. Caleb turned to him, surprised. I'm no manager, Richard. You're more than you think, Richard said, his eyes steady. You've been managing all along, Sadie, Clara, this school. You've got the heart for it. Caleb didn't answer right away, but the offer settled into him, warm and solid. It wasn't just a job, it was a purpose. A way to honor Ellie, to protect Sadie and Clara, to give back to a world that had nearly broken him. He thought of the families like his, scraping by, terrified of the next hospital bill. He thought of the kids who needed someone to see them, to blow bubbles when the world felt too heavy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Caleb blew a stream of bubbles into the air. Sadie and Clara squealed, chasing them, their voices a chorus of joy. The younger students joined in, their laughter a ripple that spread across the courtyard. Richard clapped a hand on Caleb's shoulder, and for the first time in years, Caleb felt whole, not because he'd erased the past, but because he'd found a future in it. He saw Ellie in Sadie's smile, in Clara's courage, in the bubbles that caught the last light of day. Each one was a fleeting, fragile promise of hope, of healing, of a world where small acts could mend broken hearts. Caleb knew now that he wasn't just a janitor, or a manager, or even father. He was a man who'd learned to keep going, to find light in the darkness, to blow bubbles when the world demanded tears. The courtyard was quiet now, the bubbles gone, but their shimmer lingered in the air, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was light to be found, if you were willing to look for it. And Caleb, with Sadie's hand in his, Clara's laughter in his ears, and Richard's friendship at his side, knew he'd never stop looking.